This summer marks 40 years since the release of one of the most memorable 1980s, I guess, technically sports films. It was the biggest sleeper hit of the year. This means that no one thought the movie was going to be nearly as good as it ended up being. And I can't really blame them, as for myself, it would be many years until I finally watched it. The idea of a teenage Rocky with karate instead of boxing was never that interesting to me as a kid. And I don't know why, because when I say that statement out loud, it sounds pretty awesome. I feel the same as the audiences did back in the day. I greatly underestimated this film and was met with a surprisingly rewarding experience, and have since returned to this film quite fondly. I thought it would be a nice way to celebrate the film's 40th anniversary by looking at the film's creation, the production that went into the film, as well as looking at what makes the film so special itself, and the legacy it left behind. The origin of Karate Kid goes to the writer, Robert Mark Kamen. It was 1964, and Kamen at the time was 17 years old. A native-born New Yorker, he was attending the New York World Fair. There, he was attacked by a group of bullies. After a harsh beating, he became inspired to learn self-defense. Sounds pretty similar to another popular figure's origin story. He began to study martial arts, but he didn't agree with the ethics of his first school or teacher. The instructor was a Marine captain who was training the students that violence and revenge was the answer. Kamen then went to study a different school of martial arts. He would go on to learn Okinawan Goju Ryu style. Goju Ryu is a style that utilizes both hard and soft techniques. Hard techniques are attacks that require more force to execute, meeting force with force. These techniques can be both offensive or defensive. Soft techniques, as you can probably assume, are less power intensive, as their goal is to deflect a strong attack's force and use it against them. Kamen learned these styles from his Japanese sensei, who spoke little to no English and supposedly was a student of Chojun Miyagi, the founder of the style. So, fans of the film can see how these events are reflected in the film. I must admit, this is all really fascinating to learn, as I had no idea any of this was based in reality. That is perhaps why the first film is the most emotionally investing of the series. Now, Kamen didn't write Karate Kid because of the events right away. It was actually a film producer, Jerry Weintraub, who was developing a story about a young child who earns a black belt to fight against bullies, based on a news story that he had heard. So when that idea came down to Kamen, he incorporated his own real-life experiences into the film's original concept, molding into the script that would become what we saw on screen. The film was directed by John Avildsen, who of course was the director of Rocky and Rocky IV. Which is why I also made the Rocky joke early on, one that Stallone himself makes. Although I can't really tell if he's joking about it or is actually upset about the story. Avildsen has a really interesting career. He directed one of the best sport films of all time that earned him an Academy Award, and then proceeded to be nominated for 3 Razzies for Worst Director. One of those being Karate Kid 3, which is typically the least favorite of the trilogy for most. Frankly, I haven't seen it in over a decade, but I mean to revisit the sequels after this video. As for the cast, a lot of now popular faces were up for the lead role. C. Thomas Howell, Robert Downey Jr., Nicolas Cage, Tom Cruise, Sean Penn, Eric Stoltz, and the list goes on. But we all know that the role went to Ralph Macchio. Part of what earned him this role was his previous work as Johnny in The Outsiders a year prior, another film with quite an ensemble cast, in which Ralph himself has stated that that role greatly influenced his performance of Daniel. When auditioning for the role, Avildsen simply complimented Macchio's acting abilities, then stating, "Don't get your hopes up, but you should start taking some karate lessons," as his instincts told him that Ralph would get the role, which came true. According to Ralph, Avildsen never had to give much direction to him. unless he just really went off, and really just let the role play naturally. The other lead of this film is Mr. Miyagi, the famous mentor of Danny, whose lines have forever been immortalized into pop culture. Strap in for this one. The role was originally planned to go to Toshiro Mifune. Let's all just take a moment to think. Wow, Mifune was almost Miyagi. And let me say this, alright? I love Mifune to death. I have no doubt in my mind that he is one of the greatest actors of all time. And I'm happy that he did not get this role. And this is in no way a disrespect to Mifune. But Pat Morita is Mr. Miyagi. Mifune didn't get the role for a couple reasons, one being his lack of English. Ironic that the real-life inspiration didn't speak any English, but still got through to Common. Pat Morita initially auditioned for the role, but was rejected. He was well known for his comedic roles, especially in Happy Days, which had just ended a year prior to this film, and his image hurt his odds of playing this type of role. So, Morita changed his image, and his speech patterns, modeled after his uncle supposedly. The role was his. Although Morita has since changed the story in interviews, either way, the role was his. Morita would be the first Asian American nominated for an Oscar in the category of Best Supporting Actor in this film. So, it goes without saying, perfect casting. The other star of this film is Johnny, who they also went through several actors to play. One notably was Crispin Glover. I just can't see that. But William Zabka had many factors that earned him the role. For one thing, when he did the audition, he did something that you typically don't do to your casting directors, which in this case was Adelson himself. He grabbed Adelson by the collar, gave the lines, "Watch your mouth, asshole," which I believe is actually a deleted scene in the movie, left, and then came back apologizing that that was the character, not him. This impressed Adelson, but not enough to convince him for the role. For one thing, Zabka had a height difference over Ralph, in which Zabka correctly told Adelson, well, Bruce Lee was shorter than Kareem, and he still won. That did the trick, and he got the role. The love interest, Allie, with an I, went to Elizabeth Shue, who got it because of popular Burger King commercials that she was in. Hey, we all gotta start somewhere, and looky there, she even got to play in Back to the Future after this. When it came to making the film, nobody was really for it. Much of the cast and crew thought it was pretty dumb. Either that the story was corny, or that the title was dumb, or that it was The Rocky Kid. The production seemed so simple and unimpressive. Frankly, there was no reason really for anyone to think that this movie would be a hit. But that just goes to show, with the right people and the right talent, you can spin something that seems cheesy on paper into an emotionally investing story that becomes all the rage. After all, the film was made with an $8 million budget, shot only in a few months, and ended up with $130 million in the box office. Box office numbers would go even higher with re-releases. The film was met with positive responses from critics and audiences alike, although initially critics were pretty decisive at the time. But one of the most notable film critics of all time, Roger Ebert, gave it a perfect score, claiming it to be one of the best films of the year. Keep in mind, I don't always agree with Ebert, but I do respect him greatly as a film analyst.
And this is the first karate movie I've seen where the philosophy of this karate, instead of just being a fighting technique, it becomes a whole approach to life.
Ebert opens his review with, "I didn't want to see this movie," and then ends it by stating, "The title gives you the wrong idea. It's one of 1984's best movies." And let me tell you this, 1984 saw the release of some of the best movies ever made, and I won't hear anything otherwise. Some absolute gems and masterpieces came out in this year. So that's saying a lot. 1984 has so many anniversaries that I don't even think I could talk about every movie I want to. That said, they really hate the title of this movie. So how is it that with so much going against this movie, it ended up being such a success? Well, let's look into the movie and find out. The opening of the film has a lot of exterior landscape shots of the LaRussos traveling to California with promises of a new life. These shots illustrate this fish out of water theme as Daniel moves from his family to a new place with no friends or family there. As the small, barely functioning car moves forward, the camera zooms out away from the family, still leaving them in a smaller perspective. These shots also illustrate the intense summer heat, which in its own right can be symbolic for claustrophobia or alienation. Basically, these shots are all building up this idea of isolation that Danny will be feeling for most of the first act of the film. Immediately at their new home, Danny's hopes and expectations are shattered when he sees how much of a dump his new California home is, even the pool he was so looking forward to. Those promises of a new life are not instantaneous. The family car still barely works, the living conditions aren't ideal, and Danny's new group of friends almost immediately abandon him. Granted that his impatience does amplify his irritation with this situation. His mother is probably just as distraught, but is trying her damnedest to adapt and stay strong for Danny. I don't think enough people give Randy Heller as Lucille enough credit in this film. Growing up for a good bit of my youth with a single mother myself, I relate to her desire to try and give a better life to Danny. There are endless opportunities for a better life here, but it's difficult to see those when you refuse to look for them. Now, Danny does try at first, when he befriends this guy who cares what his name is, and makes some friends at the beach. He meets Allie, and it all plays out like an 80s commercial. Here are the teens having fun and listening to music playing on the beach. Again, you can feel a lot of the dialogue here comes off as natural because it was. It helps steer away from this cringy feeling to being something that's actually rather adorable. Of course, things go awry when the Cobra Kai show up. Johnny Lawrence is a fascinating character. There have been many theories that point to Johnny being the real victim, and there are good points to that, but I don't entirely agree with it. And I stand that both were in the right and the wrong here. Really, it comes down to Allie. Consider the line where Tommy and Bobby are talking about Johnny, God, these names, about how they broke up. One of them remarks that Allie broke up with Johnny, but Johnny didn't. So he still hasn't gotten over her, which is rough, sure, but she evidently is no longer interested in him. And in fact, she's very much troubled by him. And being overly persistent when they already don't like you isn't a super attractive strategy. People will argue that Danny is wrong for making a move on Allie, being that she was Johnny's girl. Was is the key there. Sure, in his mind, he still holds a toxic possession over her, but as the old saying goes, boys will be boys. And that said, Danny also didn't know who Johnny was. He's literally been here for hours, not even a whole day yet. And these so-called friends always flabbergast me here. Because why are they talking about Danny as if he's a wimp? He just fought someone twice his size without backing down. Not to mention this guy was trained in martial arts. What chances did these idiots think they had against him? And they have the gall to talk down to Danny? Screw those guys. That said, there have also been quite a bit of theories related to Allie and toxic masculinity in this film. From an outside perspective, it's kind of understandable, but I don't think enough credit is given here to the film. You could look at Allie as a trophy of Johnny and Danny's competition. They're constantly competing for her attention and her affection. Immaturely, you might think that the winner gets Allie in this battle of manliness, but that's not true at all. Allie has already chosen Danny. Although there is a still fragile connection between the two, win or lose, she would have gone to his side. That said, I also don't agree that Danny was fighting for Allie just to lord over Johnny. I believe that he genuinely liked her. and just wanted Johnny to screw off. I mean, look at this cute moment where his mom asks Danny if he's interested in any girls, and even after she leaves, he's still talking about her in a dreamlike state. It's these little details, these little moments that make this film so good. I believe that these two really did have a connection, but the damn feud between Johnny and Danny, added to his already hot-headed temperament, makes it pretty obvious why they didn't end up staying together. It's okay, Danny. We all know who the right one is. I'll say it again. I swear, Randy Heller does not get enough credit for the great job she does here. She feels like a genuine mother in all her scenes, from her concern to the embarrassing but sweet moments. The exchange here feels so real, as if it would be an actual interaction with my own mother. The way that she keeps pressing on Danny, taking off his glasses, because she knows with that motherly instinct that something is amiss. She shows such concern for Danny that I would believe that they're really mother and son here. Perhaps the most memorable scene between the two is after Johnny knocks Daniel off his bike and he finally breaks down to his mom. Again, this scene hits pretty close to home for me, and I just can't help but fully be invested in this. But what really gets me is the end of the scene where Lucille says,
Let's see if we can figure out the rules together, okay?
That just rings a strong mother to me. And of course, we spend so much time on the single mother aspect that leaves the surrogate father role. We all know the most important part of this film: Danny and Miyagi. It seems almost instantly that Miyagi both sees something in Danny and sympathizes with him. Now, I realize the sequels go into Miyagi's past more, but I really want to just focus on this film, strictly what this movie gives us, looking at it when it came out without the added lore from the sequels, right? So we could probably assume that Miyagi went through the same fish out of water phase when he moved to America, which was at least early enough for him to fight in the European theater for World War II. Of course, we also know that Miyagi himself has a hole in his heart from losing his family, and that hole led him to wanting to help the poor Danny. Miyagi probably both saw himself in this kid, but also his lost son. It seems pretty early on that Miyagi is somewhat testing Danny to see the type of person he really is. Daniel shows true courtesy to Miyagi's generosity, but it's not enough to teach him karate. Not until Miyagi saves Danny's life that he feels pressed to teach the kid. That said, he had already been giving Danny lessons before this event had even happened. First was cutting the bonsai tree, a calm exercise to teach patience and open the idea of the practice of balance. And there's so many little things that Miyagi teaches him beyond just karate and fighting, so much as just the proper way to drink tea. It does seem that Miyagi was trying to push Danny away a little bit at first, to relate more with his youth instead of spending time with him.
Not by myself. I'm with you.
To make honey, young bee need young flower, not old prune.
I also hadn't noticed the nice detail until watching the HD restoration of the film, that we can actually see the pieces of Danny's Halloween outfit sitting behind him as Miyagi molds together a costume idea. I always loved the Halloween party. For one, Halloween is my favorite holiday. Just look how fun and creative kids used to be. Miyagi and Danny's outfit really plays on that creative level of what costume you could make with the stuff you have lying around at home. Now you see, the Halloween party is where you can make an interesting argument on Johnny and Daniel. Daniel did not have to do this at all. He could have just went about his business and enjoyed the party. But he really lit the fires on this one, and that's on him. Look at the traffic accident he causes after, too. It feels like a play on the trope of nerd versus bully that you would see in movies back then, where they make a prank scheme and get away with it, except here, he doesn't. And Johnny almost kills him too, which is definitely way too far, but now we're seeing the seriousness of the no mercy issue that persists later. And a shout out to Bobby for being the only Cobra Kai with a conscience. Miyagi immediately opens an opposite resolution when consoling Daniel. Daniel asks if he can be trained so he can get revenge. Miyagi immediately shuts that idea down. Karate is for defense only, but the Cobra Kai are being taught something different. As Miyagi states, there is no such thing as a bad student, but a bad teacher. Kreese is the true villain of this story. And really, we don't know anything about him. He's military, a Vietnam vet, and he's training kids with a brutal, militant discipline. No pain, no fear, no mercy. He's programming these rich kids who take his classes to be killing machines. Again, we don't really know that much about his past, but we do have this idea that he's quite narcissistic and has developed a certain attitude after his time at war. I really want to make a joke about this character being for a Rambo sequel, but that actually ended up being true. Something that was bothering me when watching the film is how little we know about Johnny, especially when thinking about all those theories that people have been developing. Again, talking purely on what this one film gives us. Obviously, Cobra Kai showed us the character in a much more different and incredible light, but I'm talking purely on what this film gives us. Why is Johnny such an asshole? There are many factors to look at it, but Zabka himself had a theory that he implemented when playing the character, and that was that Johnny too didn't have a father, or at least one that he could look up to. So Kreese took that role, and it really illustrates the parallels between Johnny and Daniel. It's more than just good teacher versus bad teacher. Both of these were father figures to these kids. They really wanted to do everything right to not disappoint their mentor. And they really wanted their attention and acknowledgement. But unfortunately for Johnny, his mentor was the wrong one. When it came to filming the character, Avildsen told Martin Kove, no smiles, smirks, nothing but evil. And that is how we're supposed to see Kreese. Unfortunately for Johnny, it's not until the end of the movie that he begins to question what he's been taught.
And it's open season. On him. And you.
Kreese is such a bastard. When Miyagi brings Daniel to his home to train, there's a nice little line that he drops, saying it reminds him of Newark. Of course, that's meant to be a bit of a comedic jab. It also brings a sense of safety and familiarity to Daniel, showing how safe he feels with Miyagi and how this environment is going to be a safe place for him.
Either you karate do yes, or karate do no.
So, do or do not, there is no try. Yeah, some of the Yoda aspects are kind of on the nose here. And of course, the whole training through chores element is incredible and memorable and super iconic to the movie. Miyagi teaching karate through doing everyday tasks with a certain discipline that can be applicable to anything. That's kind of the whole point of his teaching. The idea of balance isn't in fighting, but in our everyday life. And I really wonder how many parents in the 80s used this concept to trick their kids into being more enthusiastic about doing their chores. It isn't until being humiliated by Johnny in front of all those rude rich folk that Danny returns to Miyagi, someone that he feels safe with and goes to for comfort, only to find that his teacher is the one in need of comfort. This is my favorite scene of the movie, and I can't even describe to you the way that it broke me the first time I saw it. Miyagi drunkenly pours a drink for himself and his deceased wife, dressed in his old military uniform, and his drunken state gives Daniel tidbits of his past. Miyagi fought against the Nazis for the US military. During this time, America had put Japanese Americans in internment camps. They were scared and suspicious of their own people, their own citizens, because of this war. Miyagi's pregnant wife was in this camp. The first American-born Miyagi, he says. Sadly, his wife and child died during childbirth in a prison where they could not get a doctor. Soldiers fight for their country, but the most important thing they're fighting for is to see their families when they come home. what they're fighting for the most, to protect their loved ones, what Miyagi was fighting for, died from the neglect of his own country. He was an American fighting to protect America, but he had nothing to come home to when the war was over. He left home with the promise of protecting his family, and that family is now gone. This movie excels because of its emotional weight, but nothing prepared me for this scene.
Life, son, complication, but complication, but no doctor can. Run the free, I'm free. No doctor can.
I feel like every time I've seen this film with somebody, this moment always comes out as shocking, because you don't really expect a scene with this kind of weight to it in this type of film. I realized, much like Danny, when I first watched this movie, I saw Miyagi as this invincible mystic force. Kamen even remarked that he could be the most dangerous man on the planet. But this scene reminds us that he is human. He has loved, lost, and suffered like all of us. And it wasn't until the HD version that I noticed that he was crying when he slept. I imagine seeing this in the 80s must have been striking as well, because Pat Morita was remembered for being a comedian, and in this scene, his acting is just so dramatically powerful. And even throughout the film, Miyagi himself is rather hilarious. His lines and the timing are phenomenal. And that makes the scene so much more painful, because we don't want to see Miyagi in such a state. And I also think that this was an early film to really bring mainstream attention to the imprisonment of Japanese Americans during the war. I can't really recall any other examples at this time. If you know any, please leave some in the comments below. Anyway, what really ties this scene together is the ending of it. Danny puts Miyagi to bed, turns off the light, and as he leaves, he turns around and bows to his teacher. No one's watching, no one knows that Danny did it, because it wasn't for show. It was genuine. The next scene shows us a sunrise with a newly motivated Daniel. Their relationship strengthens, and we can really see how they've grown to love each other. Not as teacher and student, but more like father and son. The best line in the entire film is this:
You're the best friend I ever had.
You pretty okay too.
On the other hand, I absolutely despise how Danny treats Allie here. I don't really understand how this works out in the end. If anything, this probably is the weakest aspect of the film. It's very much devoid of how adorable the relationship was prior to the film. And the last 20 minutes of the movie is what all the action fans were waiting for, the big tournament. The ref here is actually Patrick E. Johnson, who was a stunt coordinator for the film, a real-life black belt, and he had actually been in Enter the Dragon. I love the handmade nature of Daniel's gi, and it really strikes over the fancy Cobra Kai ones, which adds another layer to that theme. It didn't feel like a huge theme of the film, but it does play a role that throughout the movie Daniel is constantly struggling or is being embarrassed with being the poor kid. He likes the rich girl with rich parents that definitely don't like him. Johnny's a rich kid, the Cobra Kai are rich kids. There's this clash of classes going on here. But even so, the film shows us that the poor family with the broken down car can still have fun and are still more connected through love. And it's the same with Danny's gi. Back to the fight. Danny wins his first fight, in which Ali exclaims, "You're the best! And wouldn't you know what song plays next? One that I can't play because of copyright." Fun tidbit about the filming of the tournament: this was a real audience atmosphere, and it really added to the excitement for the actors. The cameras were hidden in the bleachers, and they were using long lenses, and it kind of kept this sense of reality for the actors and brought that extra layer to us, the viewer, as well. To no one's surprise, Danny makes it to the semifinals, where Kreese tells Bobby to illegally injure Danny. Kreese really feared that kid, actually. Bobby, of course, being the only Kai with a conscience, wasn't prone to this idea, but out of fear for Kreese, did it anyway. And as soon as he did it, he immediately pleaded for Danny's forgiveness. And I wonder if Danny even noticed that. Miyagi uses the old pain suppression technique so we can all see the fight that we waited the whole movie for. Again, I really wish Johnny could have been a little bit more involved just to add to this fight, to the hype of this fight. But what's really interesting here are the teachers' reactions. Kreese wants to win. He doesn't want Johnny to win so he can be the champion. He wants to win through Johnny. He wants to be number one. He wants to put another trophy in the glass case. Miyagi doesn't care who wins as long as Danny's safe. As he already told Daniel, you've proven your point. Win or lose doesn't matter. But this is an 80s movie, so crane kick. Johnny says you're all right, LaRusso, which I tend to forget that happens. Immediate credits, and the movie's over. Karate Kid 2 opens right after the tournament, just like Rocky 2, with an extra scene of Kreese and Johnny. For some reason, I always think that this scene is in this movie, but it's not, and that kind of bugs me. That's the original Karate Kid. As an isolated movie, it's pretty spectacular. It defies being another cheesy 80s sports movie by being something with real emotional weight to it that's really investing for us to see. Like Rocky, it's the type of underdog story that we just love. It's full of heartwarming surprises that you just wouldn't expect from this kind of movie, such as the drunk Miyagi scene, and quite a lot of movies following this would borrow these tropes, but it just never had that same flame. Much like another film that came out weeks before this one of my favorite movies of all time, if not my favorite, it was lightning in a bottle. All of the right people at the right time. A little iconic movie was made, and its legacy still goes strong to this day. Not only for its sequels, but for the fact that it's a story that can still resonate with audiences. Cobra Kai, I think, solidifies that idea. Frankly, I'm bored of legacy sequels. They're usually the same thing and unimpressive. More often than not, I'm just excited to see actors returning to their iconic roles, but find myself not really caring about anything else in the film. Cobra Kai was a bit special though, and this isn't a full in-depth thing. That's deserving of its own video, as are the sequels. Cobra Kai works on that level of, here's the elements of the original that work and are good, and let's modernize them for an audience. Now, lots of things try to modernize things for audiences, but tend to lose what works in the first place. Such as this film modernizing not in a way that we need to do certain agendas, but let's try to actually write a story that people will want to watch. Let's try to make things resonate a little bit better with modern audiences and make it still exciting for fans of the original to enjoy. Now, Cobra Kai is not perfect at all, but it has a lot of cool stuff going on, and truthfully, it made Johnny my favorite character. Not only that, but with newer seasons, we're seeing returning characters, and we're getting more of these resolutions to the OG stories while opening up new ones. Other than that, there have been many sequels and a reboot for the film. Karate Kid 2 and 3 continue Danny's story, and say what you will, I don't give a damn. I like Karate Kid 2. I don't care. I like it. There was a fourth movie, kind of, with Hilary Swank. I've never seen it, and I don't know a single person who has. And then there was the remake that I really didn't care for just because I didn't see a point in it, but it does have its own charm, and I respect that it tried to do something different. So different that it really is its own story with its own characters. And it seems that they are currently producing a new film that will bring Jackie Chan's character into the main line. So maybe I should give it another shot before that comes out. That said, the sequels are fun and all, but this was just something really special, and I really encourage it to still be viewed today by younger and older audiences alike. Sure, it's got plenty of 80s charm in it, but really, it is a timeless story that has something to offer all of us. Did you see this film back in the day, or did you watch it later? Let me know in the comments below, and give me any other suggestions of movies you'd like to hear me talk about. As always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. As always, I'll see you next time.